Yes, welcome into Sports Bit. Betting Insight today, Paulie and Teddy. Thursday, October 20th. Big game breakdown. Thursday means college football. TCU, West Virginia. Stanford, Colorado. Wisconsin, Iowa. Arkansas, Auburn. And the top 10 showdown, Texas A&M and Alabama. The play of the day coming up, red hot. Don't forget 21-9-1 on the football season. We'll have a football play at the end of the show. Bad beats, bad bets, bad for the books. We'll cover MLB here, Teddy, as the Indians, 7-1 in the playoffs, 7-1 to the under. They make the World Series for the first time since 1997. They try to win the World Series for the first time since 1948. And for the first time, they have the home field advantage in the World Series, which starts Tuesday night, the same night the Cavs open up, and they get their rings.
Something special is happening in Cleveland this year, and we talked about it in the regular season. I'm not going to pat myself in the back too much because I didn't grab Cleveland at the start of the playoffs to make the World Series from the American League, but it's a team that we talked about all year long, and they've reached the World Series beating Toronto in 5 games as big underdogs in Game 5, despite the fact that they hit 168 in this series. They didn't get anything from their offense. That's how good the pitching was. That's the lowest ever for a team that won a series. In fact, players other than Lindor hit 138. It wasn't for Francisco Lindor. They hit 138 in the series. So Cleveland's pitching, and most importantly, their bullpen, has been ridiculous this postseason. That's why they're 7-1 to the under, and that's why they're going to the World Series.
Yeah, astonishing. No Salazar, no Carrasco, and Bauer doesn't have a pinky finger. And they're in the World Series. But the trade, the reason they're here, you're right, the bullpen and the acquisition of Andrew Miller, what was it, 24 innings, 15 strikeouts? Come on, he's your MVP.
Oh, my God. I mean, including yesterday, his postseason win probability added is 0.83. That means him alone has, and his contributions have generated almost 1 win in value to the Indians.
How do you think they match up against the winner of the National League? Because I imagine Bauer's out. So it's going to be Kluber, Tomlin, Clevenger. Hey, I thought Merritt pitched well, too.
Of course he did. I mean, the Blue Jays got shut out in Game 5. But I think Cleveland will most assuredly be underdogs to Chicago. I would expect if the Dodgers beat the Cubs, they'll be underdogs to the Dodgers as well.
Okay, and the National League series tied at 2. The Cubs break out of it, a 10-2 win. The Bats came alive. Had some help as the Dodgers made a lot of errors, but Russell and Rizzo break out of it. Madden backed his guys. He was patient. They each had 3 hits apiece as the Bats finally woke up.
Yeah, and my whole thought process is going into Game 4, the first run's going to win the series. The team that scores first will win the series. And when Gonzalez got thrown out at the plate, and it was a close play, couldn't be overturned, I understand that. The Cubbies finally had some positive momentum, and then boom, the next half inning, coupled with some bad LA defense, there's 4 on the board. And as soon as they plated those runs, it was like the shackles were off. Back-to-back shutout losses. They hadn't scored since the 8th inning of Game 1. When they plated those runs and Rizzo and Russell finally broke out of it, man, it's like a different Cubs team. I think even though this series is tied 2-2, the Cubs won the series last night. I think they go to the World Series. And, of course, it was a very good result for the house. There was a lot of wise guy steam on L.A. in that game. That line was in the plus 105 range at the open, closed at the minus 115. There was under money as well, 6.5 with juice to the over at the open, closed 6.5 with juice to the under. So that was a pretty good game for the books when it comes to the MLB postseason.
You think the Cubs win the series?
I thought, yes, now I do. Yeah, I really,
wow.
Yeah.
All right, I'll buy you lunch if that happens. We're going to that.
Why? What? It's 2-2, and Chicago's got 2 of the last 3 at home.
Hey, damn it, it's 1945. They haven't been there since 45. I've been through the Bartman game. I've been through 89 and 84 when they blew a 2-0 lead against the Padres. They find a way to screw this up.
Last night was different. I'm telling you, last night was different.
What do you think of, I love what Roberts is doing tonight. And I can't stress how important this game is, because if the Cubs lose, then they got to face the boogeyman, and then they got to beat Rich Hill.
Yes.
If the Cubs win, well, then all they have to do is get 1 game at home. So I like what Roberts is doing. He's kind of playing with house money, because if they started Kershaw tonight, it'd be his 4th game in 10 days. So they're saying, oh, let's back off here. But I mean, if the Cubs lose it, they get beat with their ace.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. And look, Lester versus Kershaw may be the matchup that the TV networks want. But for the Dodgers, giving Kershaw the extra rest, going with Maeda at home, the younger, less experienced hurler at home versus Kershaw, who just pitched so well at Wrigley. And if you're down 3-2, you want Kershaw. At 2-2, I understand you want to go back to Chicago up to 3-2 and have Kershaw in the mix. But Roberts has pushed the right buttons. He pushed the right buttons in the regular season. He's pushed the right buttons here in the postseason. And even when I disagreed with him on his decision in the previous series, worked out all right for LA. In this one, I don't think there's any question. I mean, Lester in the first meeting, look at the chart right here. 6 innings of work. He outpitched Maeda when these two guys met. Was it game 1? Although both guys only gave up 4 hits, Maeda struggled with his control and gave up a couple of runs, whereas Lester was, I'm not going to say he was unhittable, but he pitched pretty well in that contest, and he's a postseason guy who I'm much more comfortable backing than I was John Lackey last night.
Wow, what a great night in sports coming up. The doubleheader on ESPN in college football, the Bears and the Packers in pivotal Game 5 in the NLCS. Up next, big game breakdown. We'll start with TCU, West Virginia, Colorado, Stanford, and Wisconsin, Iowa. That's coming up on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.
Go to SBROdds.com. Browse, compare, and shop live odds available at top online sportsbooks.
Back on SportsBit, Betting Insight today. Time for big game breakdown. As always, live odds, sportsbookreview.com. Game number 1, TCU and West Virginia. Mountaineers at home, 6.5, 65.5 the total. Couple of great games so far since both teams came into the Big 12 in Morgantown. 2014, TCU won on a last-second field goal, 31-30. 2012, TCU won 39-38 in double overtime. TCU routed West Virginia at home last year, 40-10. TCU off the bye. Chance to tweak the offense. How do you slow down a Big 12 offense? You get an SEC quarterback to come in. But Kenny Hill continues to turn the ball over. Stats, not bad, but 8 interceptions, and they were horrible in their last game. They were lucky they didn't lose to Kansas, Teddy.
Yeah, they probably should have lost to Kansas. And coming off the bye, I think it's a chance for Gary Patterson to really crack the whip a little bit after that poor showing. Quote, I'm one of those guys. I'm going to press people to be the best they can be. If I don't think they're being that, I'm going to press buttons. To be honest with you, I don't think I pushed enough buttons. Tuesday and Wednesday, I pushed a lot of buttons. Young guys got to grow up. You can't wait for their time to grow up. I hear people say, well, they'll grow up in time. I'm one of those guys that you have to push people to do as much as you can and handle as much as they can handle. We make practice hard. So when you get to a ball game, it's easy. I don't know that we've done as good a job of that as we needed to. So yeah, I would think based on that quote from Patterson that his team's going to come prepared and rested into this contest, which is a pretty good thing because they certainly weren't prepared or rested for that Kansas game. As you mentioned, a game they probably should have lost. I want to talk about Kenny Hill for a minute because, Hill's numbers, he got 2,100 passing yards. He's thrown 12 touchdowns. He's run for 7 touchdowns on the season, over 206 yards on the ground. Kenny Hill's been good, but you talk about the mistakes. This is a defense that can force teams into making a whole lot of mistakes, can't it, Paulie?
Yes, and I like what this West Virginia, I watched the entire game against Texas Tech. Holgerson's trying to build a Big 12 defense with Gibson, the defensive coordinator, and they really pushed around Texas Tech. Ground and pound, they had 332 rushing yards in that win. But is this a legitimate top 15 team? And can I trust this defense?
Well, in terms of the top 15, gosh, I mean, my priority numbers have West Virginia as a solid squad. They are not one of the top 10 squads in the country when it comes to talent. And, of course, people are going to look at West Virginia and say, oh, well, they haven't played the toughest schedule yet, and they're not that good. Just because you haven't played, all you can do is play the teams in front of you on your schedule. And the fact that West Virginia's defense has been as good as it has over the course of the first 6 weeks of the campaign, well, let's take a look at this Cliff Kingsbury quote from Texas Tech after his own offense. They were held, as you mentioned, the game that you watched, 17 points and 372 yards at home last week. Quote, they don't allow any easy access throws. They cover you up on all those quick screens. They fly down to take them away. In the run game, they keep a 6-man box. There's always a free runner coming at you who's a short tackler. All three of the linebackers they had last year are playing in the NFL. Some of the guys who were in there on Saturday will be playing at that level as well. This West Virginia defense is no joke. Facing a quarterback that's made a fair few mistakes. Well, I think the under might be the way to look at this, even though TCU so far for this season has been a pretty strong over squad every time they face another potent offense.
Yeah, and they think they can slow him down. Going back to Holgerson and the quote about Gibson, quote, "What we do defensively is hard for me to attack. That's why we do what we do. It's good against the spread. Gibby does a great job getting those guys motivated and playing hard. That's the key, being able to adjust and disguise and get lined up quick against all these up-tempo offenses," end quote. So a good test here, and see if West Virginia can keep it going. Game number 2, liveoddsportsbookreview.com. Wisconsin hits the road to take on Iowa. Wisconsin 3, -120. 42.5 the total. Tough week. Now they have to regroup after leaving it all out there in the overtime loss at home to the Buckeyes. And revenge angle here is Iowa won in Madison last year 10-6.
Yeah, I mean, from a first reaction standpoint, you say, oh, Wisconsin's going to be flat. Oh, Wisconsin, they gave it everything they had last week. They lost in OT. Now they got to go on the road. I don't know if we're going to get the Badgers' best effort. And then you start to think about it. They got revenge against Iowa for the loss in Madison last year. They also, if they win, they have a chance to get revenge against Ohio State or Michigan, whoever wins the Big Ten East.
They got to win out.
If they win out, they still capture
Right.
the Big Ten West and play in the Big Ten title game. And you look at these quotes from up and down the roster. Everybody's saying the same thing. Corey Clement, the running back, when he was asked when the Ohio State loss would go away, quote, "As soon as I leave this room," that was the post-game locker room, "that's when it ends and we turn the page. Now we look forward to Iowa and try to win out and get to the Big Ten championship." The linebacker, T.J. Watt, J.J.'s kid brother, that is the mentality. You always keep faith alive and know we're going to do our job and get things done. Defensive back, Sojourn Shelton. To be where we want to be, we've got to win out. So Wisconsin at least saying all the right things, even though in theory they're supposed to be flat coming off that Ohio State loss.
Look at the strength of schedule difference, too. Look at the big three. Wisconsin's played Ohio State, Michigan, and LSU. Who's the big three for Iowa? Northwestern, Minnesota. I mean, they lost to North Dakota State and Northwestern at home. And then they struggled to beat Minnesota. But, I mean, Iowa can run the ball, but pass protection is a problem. This is a key stat. Can they protect Beathard versus a quality defense? He's been sacked 18 times so far, 92nd in the nation. They haven't really played anybody.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, you talk about the three they faced. Wisconsin have played Ohio State, Michigan, LSU. No question, that team's battle-tested. Iowa, Northwestern, Minnesota, and I guess Iowa State or North Dakota State would be their third toughest foe. And even with that weak competition, they can't protect their quarterback. Beathard hasn't been good. And remember, the Hawkeyes, great start to the season last year. But the markets didn't respect them because they didn't beat anybody. It was one weakling after the next. This year, a lot of guys coming back. People kind of expecting the same Iowa team. Hasn't been that way. And I think Iowa might get exposed on Saturday. We'll get back to this game when it comes to play of the daytime.
One more before we go to break. LiveOddsSportsBookReview.com. Colorado on the road to take on Stanford. Stanford 2, 49.5 the total. Coach of the year, McIntyre, no question. Last 2 seasons before he arrived in Boulder, they were 2-10 and 1-11. Now his first recruiting class, they're seniors, 5-2 straight up. They are 6-0 ATS, and they've beaten the spread by 81 points. That works out to 13.5 per game. But the market's catching up now. Last year, Stanford was laying 16 on the road, and they won 42-10. Here, the line's only 2.
Yeah, and really, when you project it, that's a 3-touchdown difference based on the alternate home fields between the two teams. Stanford, they're down from last year. They're probably down double digits from last year in my power range. I think 10 or 11 points. And Colorado's up 10 or 11 points from where they were a year ago. So perhaps that significant adjustment is merited, but there's been a pretty one-sided series in the past. That being said, all of a sudden we talked about McIntyre and what he's built here. And in terms of a program that had nothing. The cupboard was absolutely bare when he got here. And it's taken 4 years. And now, finally, he has enough depth enough quality depth to play his physical style. I've been doing a lot with the quotes from opposing coaches. Let's talk about the quote from Arizona State's Todd Graham after they lost 40-16 to Colorado earlier this season. Quote, "They ran the ball on us unlike anybody has run it in the whole time I've been at Arizona State. No excuses. They kicked our tail. They just blocked our butt. I don't think anybody has done that. It wasn't real complex." What does that tell us? That physical style of Colorado football, well, in theory, that's supposed to be Stanford's strength. It hasn't necessarily been this year. It's been Colorado's strength, which makes this for an interesting matchup.
Yeah, and watching that game last week against Notre Dame, they didn't have McCaffrey. They might not have McCaffrey again. Burns was so-so against a horrible Notre Dame defense. It was the defense that had a pick six for Stanford and got them back in the game. They were down 10-0 at the half. So this kid has really struggled. And, I mean, if they don't have McCaffrey, I don't think this offense can do anything.
Well, Bryce Love last week, they didn't miss McCaffrey. I mean, I shouldn't say they didn't miss McCaffrey because you're going to miss McCaffrey. But Bryce Love, 23 carries, 129 yards. He scored a touchdown. He converted a two-pointer. It's not like they're hopeless if McCaffrey doesn't play. But obviously when a team is without their number one offensive weapon, a legitimate Heisman candidate, and there aren't a whole lot of above-average weapons on that offense other than the one guy, it's a huge loss. And I think, McCaffrey, one of the rare running backs that is legitimately worth something significant to the point spread. Should he play or should he sit?
Man, sure, night and day with Notre Dame and Colorado. You can do anything you want against Notre Dame. Up next, Arkansas, Auburn, and Texas A&M and Alabama. Coming up on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.
Hey, SportsBit viewers, tune into the MLB Odds Couple show for today, Thursday, October 20th. Mike Brenner and I both had the Cubs yesterday, and we both cashed with it, and we are not passing on today's game. We're giving a pick. We're both on the same side. Tune into the show to find out what our pick is and why, right, Mike Brenner?
Absolutely. When you get all that valuable information over there at Teddy and Paulie's house, come on over here because we got some playoff picks as well, and they're going to be cashing.
Back on SportsBit, Betting Insight today, Paulie and Teddy. Follow us on Twitter at Paulie Howard, at Teddy_covers. We continue. Live on sportsbookreview.com. Arkansas at Auburn. Auburn 9.5, 55.5 the total. Things kind of changed for Auburn, especially on offense, when Malzahn gave up the play calling duties to Lashley, the OC. Now, they're against Louisiana, Monroe, and Mississippi State, 122 times they ran the ball with only 36 passes, Teddy.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can do that against that level of competition. Not convinced they'll be able to have that same type of run and run only strategy against quality SEC foes. But let's look at a couple quotes here because this talks a lot about the concept of what happens when Lashley took over from Malzahn and all of a sudden an Auburn offense that wasn't clicking started to click. Lashley's quote, "We kind of learned our guys a little bit in what we can and can't do. We've probably been able to, I don't want to say simplify because we still have our whole playbook, but we've tried to simplify game plans, knowing what we're good at, and rep those, maybe more so, hence the run-heavy philosophy." Malzahn, quote, "That's really a tribute to the offensive staff. They looked at it and looked in the areas that we needed to improve and not do some things and maybe do more, some other things. It's not just one thing. It's just more of an approach and a point of emphasis. We're proud of our players for making that change too and for being able to execute certain things." But again, the success Auburn has had in recent weeks hasn't come against the toughest of competition on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, this line stinks. It makes zero sense what Auburn's laying here.
Well, there's a couple of factors to consider in this ballgame. And the number one factor in this point spread is the situation for these two teams. Arkansas coming off a group of physical games. They are not battle rest. They played Alabama and Ole Miss in their last two games. All right. Run out of the gym by Alabama. Tough down to the wire physical game against Ole Miss. Auburn's coming in off a bye. So that certainly factors into this point spread. But let's not forget, Arkansas was a big home dog to Ole Miss last week. The markets aren't sold on the Razorbacks. And that kind of surprised me because Austin Allen's been pretty darn good.
I know. Yeah, you like him. Better than his older brother. Look at the passer rating. 156, 1,800 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. And you mentioned it. Those are the numbers despite facing Bama, Ole Miss, and A&M. And they still have that power running game as well. game definitely smells. But you're concerned about the fatigue, and I understand with the scheduling spot.
I am. Look, I could only take Arkansas in this game. And my biggest concern is that it looks like there's a lot of other people that see the same thing that I have. This line's already been bet down. It is the most popular underdog of the week when you look at the public, sharp square type of things. Those tend to concern me. I don't like being on the most popular underdog of the week when it comes to the consensus sites. And you're right. The line smells bad. And when the line smells bad and you start to investigate and go, oh, there's a reason for this. Situationally, it's a pretty bad situation for Arkansas. Again, I consider using Razorbacks as plays of the day. Then I talked myself out of it.
All right.
Well, we talked ourselves out of it.
All right. Last game, liveoddsportsbookreview.com, the marquee game. It's number 1 against number 6. And number 1's laying 18. Alabama's 18 at home. 58.5 the total. Why would we show you a picture of Trevor Knight playing against Alabama in Oklahoma uniform? Because he lit them up in the Sugar Bowl. Lit them up January 2nd, 2014. Oklahoma won 45-31. Knight had 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. He hasn't gotten to 350 or 4 since then. He went against Nick Saban, and he blew him out.
Yeah, he sure did. And as you mentioned, he hasn't, since that one game, that one magical, the Katy Perry night that you always reference. Yeah, he hasn't gotten to 4 touchdowns or 350 passing yards in any game since then. So far this year, average season, maybe, $121 passer rating, 9 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's been at his best with his legs, running for more than 500 yards and 9 touchdowns. And you say, all right, this guy lit up Nick Saban. You wonder, do you want to motivate Nick Saban in that defense more than you normally do? An average quarterback had his career game against Saban in Alabama in a monster bowl game. Saban, he's tried to downplay it, but, this is a guy who has an ego, and we know he has an ego. Quote, he's a gifted player. He excels in passing and in the run-pass option. He was a good player then, and I think he's a better player now. So, yeah, Saban's downplaying it, but I can guarantee you that this is one of those weeks where the coaching staff burning the midnight oil, looking for all the weaknesses they can find on film against the A&M quarterback.
Well, Saban's got plenty of gifted players, and we talked about this Monday, amazing but true. 9 straight games with a non-offensive touchdown. They've scored. The defense and special teams have scored 11 touchdowns this year, more than the offenses from Stanford and South Carolina. 21 of them since last October. And with all this defense and special teams, they might have the best wide receiving core in the country, led by Ridley.
Yeah, say that again. The defense and the special teams have scored 11 touchdowns this year.
Yeah,
that is more than the offenses for Stanford and South Carolina.
And 9 games in a row.
Yeah, that's, when Alabama's defense is outscoring Stanford's offense, and we're 7 games into the season, that's something. And when you look at the explosive weapons that Alabama has on the outside, you talked about Calvin Ridley. That huge wide receiver core. We've talked about them on SportsBit more than once. Lane Kiffin, he keeps adding tweaks to the playbook. The last 2 games, they're at Arkansas. They're at Tennessee. They run 127 plays for 1,111 yards. That's 8.7 yards per play. And, remember how well A&M played against this team with Johnny Football. They gave Bama fits with Johnny Football. They beat him up twice. Now, the last 2 years, it's been 100-23 in favor of Alabama. I just wonder at the number 6 team in the country, Texas A&M, and again, I didn't even know they were number 6. I know
you don't pay attention. I know.
Rating, yeah. But still, the number 6 team in the country, there's a reason that they're 18-point dogs here. I'm not convinced they're tough enough to compete for the full 60 minutes. And just like in the NFL, where I'm like, I don't want to bet against the very best teams. I don't want to bet against Alabama. They score on defense and special teams every single week.
Yep, agree and agree. All right. 12-4 with the play of the day run. We're on a 12-4 run, winner on Monday. We're 21-9-1 on the football season. We already gave out BYU +7 tonight at Boise. Money time, we're going back to Wisconsin and Iowa. Now that we don't have to lay the hook, let's get to the window with betting number 333. Wisconsin laying 3 at Iowa. Iowa's average at best, Wisconsin the better team, and you saw the schedule as we ran it down earlier. Corey Clement, 164 yards against Ohio State, and it'll only get stronger as the season goes on. They will wear down Iowa. They'll do enough offensively for some turnovers too. Wisconsin, the play of the day, laying the 3. We're back Friday. MLB playoffs, NLCS we'll get to, and we'll run it all down in the NFL. Key injuries, market moves, and the big games in the NFL coming up, and another London game. We'll talk to you then on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.